Call to order the Subcommittee on Readiness, Subcommittee of the House Armed Services Committee. I want to welcome everybody this morning. Thank you all for being here for today's Readiness hearing on the effects of reduced infrastructure and base operating support investments on Navy readiness. This is the second of 3 hearings on this topic. In December, the Army and Marine Corps testified to increased readiness risks due to reduced installation investments. I look forward to hearing the views of the Navy today and the Air Force next week. I'd like to welcome our Navy panel of experts. This morning we have with us Vice Admiral Dixon Smith, Commander, Navy Installations Command, Rear Admiral Mary Jackson, Commander, Navy Region Southeast, Captain Lou Schager, Commanding Officer, Naval Air Station Oceana. Over the last several years, the subcommittee has largely focused on operational readiness recovery since the drawdown of forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. At the same time, the Department of Defense assumed risk in infrastructure investments and reduced mission support services by redirecting funds from installation programs to other operational and training budget priorities. Uncertain funding levels stemmed from repeated continuing resolutions, and sequestration exacerbated these risks. The purpose of this hearing is to clarify the Navy's choice for infrastructure and installation services, to address funding priorities and mitigation strategies, and to gather more detail on the current and future impact of these decisions on operations and training from the commander's perspective. As witnesses testify, I would ask you to address existing risk in the infrastructure and installation support program and impacts to readiness. Also, how will the recent 2-year budget reshape those risks and impacts? And what will the level of risk and impacts over the next 10 years be if budget levels remain constant or return to sequestration levels? I'd like to now turn to our ranking member, Madeline Bordallo, for any remarks that she may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the witnesses for being here this morning. I do thank you, Mr. Chairman, for arranging this hearing on our infrastructure investments and their effect on our Navy readiness. This hearing continues the series of hearings that we are conducting to look into how reduced infrastructure investments impact the readiness. To the witnesses, I thank you all again for your service and for being here today. Over the years, this subcommittee has held hearings on the state of our military infrastructure and the impact that budget decisions have had on the department's ability to maintain and recapitalize that infrastructure. This subcommittee has closely examined issues impacting the state of our military's readiness and the devastating impacts that sequestration have had. As we received testimony from each service, Army and Marine Corps in December, and the Navy and the Air Force this month, I believe this is the first time that we have held subcommittee hearings where we attempt to understand the impact that budget decisions regarding military infrastructure and installation support are having and will have on training and readiness in the future. We have heard evidence from several military installations that is indicative of adverse impacts to training and operations due to degraded infrastructure and installation support. And if this is the case, there are indications of a broader trend. The subcommittee needs to understand what the impacts are and what needs to be done to address the situation. We often hear that the department is accepting risk due to the budget constraints that Congress has placed on the department. For the Navy's infrastructure program, this can be seen in funding FSRM below the OSD model of 90%, and in a decrease in military construction funding compared to pre-sequestration levels. We also hear that the department is managing that risk and still performing the mission. We understand and appreciate the military's can-do and make-do attitude, but I hope that today our witnesses will provide specific examples of how this risk in the infrastructure enterprise has impacted military readiness or could impact military readiness. For example, we need to know if training opportunities are being lost, scaled down, deferred, or canceled because of range safety and training functions are not adequately funded. We need to know if training sessions or missions are no longer realistic or adequate to meet current operational needs because the facilities in which such training is conducted are not serviceable. Already, our full-spectrum readiness recovery timelines extend beyond 2020, and even that can be accomplished only with stable funding. So this has resulted from a series of financial decisions to defer spending on preventative maintenance in favor of more pressing readiness elements, and frankly, with the Navy for shipbuilding and other capital asset priorities. However, we cannot afford to continue neglecting critical installation maintenance projects without seeing readiness being significantly affected. Without fully equipped, functioning, and well-maintained installations, we cannot generate the readiness that is needed, and our men and women in uniform, as well as our civilian personnel performing their duties around the country and the world, deserve that. So again, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for holding this very important hearing.
Thank you, Madeline. Admiral Smith, I've been told that you'll be making one opening statement on behalf of all the witnesses, so please proceed. And as a reminder, your written testimony has already been made available to our members and will be part of our official record. Admiral Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Badile and distinguished members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the impact of reduced infrastructure and base operating support investments of Readiness with you today. I'm proud to represent the more than 52,000 military and civilian personnel and their families who are dedicated to the shore mission, sustaining the fleet, enabling sailors, and supporting our Navy family. Joining me today, Mr. Chairman, as you said, Rear Admiral Mary Jackson, Commander, Navy Region Southwest out of Jacksonville, Florida, and Captain Lou Schager, our Commanding Officer, Naval Air Station, Oceana, and Virginia Beach. I'd also like to introduce my Force Master Chief, Andrew Thompson, while not part of this panel, is here with us today. I rely heavily on his insight and counsel. He plays an integral role in our ability to manage our shore enterprise operations, particularly when it comes to the quality of life programs for our sailors, civilians, and families. With 70 installations worldwide, the Navy shore enterprise is much more than buildings, piers, and runways. Our shore installations provide the platform to train and enable our sailors, sustain our ships and aircraft, and support our military families. We are the backbone, launch platform, safe haven, and home of our fleet. The shore enterprise is complicated and vast, with a mission that spans from operating ports and airfields to security, childcare, counseling, housing, food service, just to name a few. We are constantly juggling multiple priorities to support emerging fleet needs and requirements. Our fleet relies on us. Yet budget shortfalls have compelled the Navy to reduce our investment in shore readiness to preserve the operational readiness of our fleet. Looking at our existing facilities, we are currently funding the sustainment, restoration, and modernization of our facilities only enough to maintain the overall condition of our most critical infrastructure for the short term. We are funding facility sustainment below the Department of Defense goal of 90%, and our facilities are deteriorating at an accelerated rate. Regarding the operation of our installations, we remain committed to adequately funding fleet operations, sailor and family support programs, and child development. However, due to funding shortfalls, we continue to accept a deliberate level of risk for the remainder of our base operating support functions, such as facility services, ground maintenance, and administrative support. While these situations are not ideal, they are necessary in today's fiscal environment. I realize this hearing is not the first time you've heard about the strain that is put upon our shore leaders across all military services and the challenging decisions we make every day. Navy's challenges are very similar to the other military services. Shore infrastructure and support services are enablers to training and operational capabilities, readiness, morale, and health and well-being of the overall force. Having served as a base commander, regional commander 3 times, and now as Commander Navy Installations Command, I have experienced firsthand the challenges and the opportunities across the shore domain. I have made it a priority to connect with our operational commanders and sailors to witness firsthand the direct impact our installations have on readiness. I have been impressed by the dedication and commitment to delivering the quality support we provide to our fleet, our sailors, and the Navy family. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral Smith. I appreciate that perspective. I want to begin by asking what categories and types of installation services are most important for the Navy in raising and sustaining readiness. And as you point out, with infrastructure investments being below targeted goals, being below OSD goals, what does the Navy do to prioritize where the limited dollars go as far as sustaining Navy readiness. So if you can give us an idea across which types of facilities, which areas do you target the dollars that you do have in order to do the most to sustain readiness?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So our top priorities are sustaining that fleet readiness and also our strategic deterrent triad. So we focus and make sure that we are funding our nuclear weapons facilities, making sure that they are fully where they need to be, and then also things that take care of that fleet readiness. So our shipyards and depots. We ensure that they're getting the resources they need to bring them back to where they need to go. We also focus on other critical operations, so our communication stations, our runways, supporting facilities for our airfields and our ports. At the same time, we also need to make sure that we're taking care of our fire and security assets. And then we'll go look at our quality of life programs, again, making sure that we are funding first the ones I mentioned in my opening comments, child care and the quality of life programs.
Thank you, Admiral Smith. I'm going to go down to Ms. Bordallo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you said in your testimony, Admiral, the fiscal constraints have required commanders at the Pentagon in the field to prioritize critical maintenance and operational readiness needs against deferring less pressing restoration projects. So as you note, that is not a sustainable solution in the long term. Could you elaborate on the broader aspects or impacts on future readiness and quality of life for our sailors that result from deferring non-critical costs?
The long term, so when we take risk now, we're pushing that risk out. And so we keep an eye on that very closely. And that long-term risk, as we move towards that, that becomes then what we focus on. So what we are putting ourselves into is a reactive mode. And so where we don't as much look forward and are ahead of the problem and prioritize, we become reactive. So we get to the point now where we don't fix things, repair facilities, infrastructure that is required, that we know is coming required until it breaks. And so that means we take money away from things that we've programmed for to fix the now, if it's an operational necessity or if it's an air conditioning system in a child development center. I mean, we just had this week a boiler system go down for a child development center. And so we weren't expecting that, so we took those funds from something else to get that facility back up to take care of our families and get those kids back in that CDC. Lou, I don't know if you want to extrapolate on that down at the installation level.
Yes, sir. I agree with Admiral in that oftentimes it feels like we're treating symptoms and not the root problem. And I think the long-term sustainability of, for example, hangars at Oceana, we have a project that's correcting some issues at one of our hangars currently. That'll be done within a couple months. All the hangars have issues and challenges. A lot of roofs are leaking. We have some fire protection challenges, some AFFF, which is a foam used to fight aircraft-specific fires. We have some challenges in the hangars for that. And so we've mitigated that risk by having maintainers aware of those challenges. They communicate with the fire department, our own fire department, before they do specific kind of maintenance that could affect that. And so that's how we mitigate those kind of risks. However, if I had enough money to repair all of the hangars right now, I couldn't do it because right now we shifted squadrons to other hangars. So there's not room, there's not capacity to move all these squadrons around while we're repairing hangars. We can do one at a time. And so that's why it's really crucial to have a plan laid out where it's predictable. And the Commodore can count on this hangar being repaired at this time so when the squadron returns from deployment, they can get back into their training cycle. And so I think segueing or continuing on with Admiral's thoughts, I think if we don't have that sustained programmatic funding, I think it'll exponentially get more difficult to manage those risks as we continue on.
Well, yes, Rear Admiral.
Ma'am, if I could just also add from a regional perspective, our process by which we are aware of the projects that are needed, either because of life cycle or because of degradations over a period of time, and our condition indexes are low, We have a process by which we know that, and we rack and stack, and we work very closely with our warfighters, our warfare enterprises, to make sure that we have that awareness. But as the installation commander pointed out, there's only so much to go around. And so what happens is although we have a plan, for example, to change out an entire system, a chiller system at a dry dock, or HVACs at missile processing plants, we end up dealing with the breakages that occur. So we will fix pieces and parts rather than holistically when the whole system needs to be fixed. And so we then get hit twice because we do the small repair, but then we still have to do the longer, big repair to get us back to where we need to be. Thank you.
Well, I certainly couldn't agree with all of you more, because the minute you neglect maintenance, you're in trouble. But as a follow-up, facility sustainment has taken the biggest hit in infrastructure, and base support investments since sequestration became the law of the land. So as we work to restore regular order and provide future year fiscal awareness, I was encouraged by progress in the fiscal year 2016 budget request, which took steps to address critical maintenance needs, particularly within the facilities sustainment, restoration, and modernization accounts. What steps do you see or anticipate being taken to implement the April 2014 OSD Facility Sustainment Policy Memorandum, particularly to meet the 90% sustainment requirement? Admiral?
Yes, ma'am. So the sustainment levels that we're getting right now will just reduce the decline. So as you indicated, we're being funded to less than the 90% that OSD desires. Our facilities right now have a facility condition index code of just over 80%. With the current funding level, that's going to decrease at 0.5% a year. So we're going to be at 2.5% decrease by the end of this fit up. So the funding that we've received is slowing that decline, but we're still declining.
Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Vardalia. We'll now go to Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my question gets to demolition of obsolete buildings. How many buildings does the Navy currently have that are considered obsolete?
I'll have to take that for the record for the total Navy. I don't know that. Mary or Lou, do you know specific numbers for your installation or region?
Do you know approximately?
So I can tell you this fiscal year, and thanking the committee, because I think Oceana has been a benefactor of identifying some needs. But we have demolition money this year, just over $2 million. We have some facilities, about I think 7 that are going to be demoed, and those are not large facilities. You know, those encompass a variety of things that will help create some efficiencies in how we operate on the installation.
And I know you were taking it for the record. I'd also like to know how many were demolished last year. It seems to me that a tremendous amount of money could be saved if we were more aggressive in the disposal of properties that we know are obsolete, instead of maintaining them to any standard when we're not going to use them.
Yes, sir. No, and I'll get you that number, but you're correct. So in a pressurized fiscal budget, where we have to make decisions, there are plenty of facilities that we would like to demolish. We're not demolishing those because we've got to take that money and put it elsewhere. So some years in the past few years, we've had a zeroed out account. Others, we've had less demolition funds than we would like to be able to demo. And as you point out, we now then have to, while we put them in layup, there are still things we need to do to maintain them, plus their eyesores and all the other things that come with dilapidated buildings. So we are not demoing what we need to demo. We're inheriting a backlog on that, and it's increasing, and I'll get you the specifics.
I think one of the things that would be helpful to the committee as well is, certainly in the private sector, what you would look at is how much am I going to pay to maintain that facility to any standard versus what does it cost me to demolish it, and how many years does it take for me to get the payback to go ahead and get rid of the building. And certainly if your return on that is over the course of 2 or 3 years, it makes a lot of sense to go ahead and get rid of the building. But those are the issues that I would appreciate some additional details on. And other than that, thank you for your service.
Sure, Mary.
Thank you for being here today.
Sir, if I may add from a regional perspective, when we're talking about demolition, and I don't have the exact numbers, and we'll provide that, but predominantly when we're talking about demolition, we are in those facilities and using them for the requirements as best we can. And in many cases, I won't say all, but the preponderance, it's because we want to demolish and then replace it because the requirement still stands. It has evolved. Perhaps there's been mission growth that we need to address, but it's not as easy as taking the building completely down to the ground and not being able to replace it because the requirements are still very real.
Sure. If it's obsolete, you would assume that it was vacated. If it's obsolete and not vacated, then that's a different scenario. So maybe you could break it down between the ones that are vacated and the ones that are not vacated. One last question: how much do we spend? You probably can't quantify this. How much are we spending in addition on repairs and maintenance because of the bid process where you're forced to take the lowest bid instead of the best bid, if you will, from the best contractor when the original building facility is built?
Best value.
You're correct. I'm not sure how I can quantify that, and that's something I'm going to have to go dig into and analyze. You're right, we go with the lowest bid. How does that impact the product we get and what follow-on repairs maybe have to have? I don't know, and I'll have to go do some analysis on that.
I spoke to a contractor in an airport one time, and he suggested that he was making a very good living doing the repairs on buildings because of the DOD rules forcing the cheapest bid to be accepted instead of the best contractor being allowed to do the job. And I just wonder if there's a way that we could put some flexibility in there where when we had contractors that we had worked with that we knew delivered a high-quality product, that we could select them based on their product and their quality that we knew they had instead of being forced to take the lowest bid. Chairman, I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. I appreciate that. I know that Chairman Thornberry, especially in the hearing yesterday, is very committed to that exact concept of best value as part of acquisition and making sure that we're looking at life cycle costs, not just the initial cost, but the life cycle cost. So I think that's an important point, certainly something we're going to continue to focus on. Thank you, Mr. Scott. We'll now go to Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses. I want to give my special greetings to Admiral Smith. San Diego sends its warm greetings to you and to Kiki as well. So good to see you. You know, I just speaking of my hometown, we've been battered through this El Nino storm by amazing records of levels of rain and weather patterns. We had a tornado warning in central San Diego for the first time that anyone can remember. It occurs to me that there's always challenges in all the waterside properties that you have, but I wonder if you feel like we are where we need to be with respect to stormwater and maintenance in the face of these kind of extreme weather events, if there's anything we should be doing together to help you with that kind of, these kind of sudden, unexpected weather events that we seem to be seeing.
Thank you, sir. And I'll ask the skipper at Oceana to go to a tactical level here in a second. But you're talking to our utility systems and stormwater falls in our utility systems, or whether you're talking steam plants or energy or electricity. And that is an area that has been neglected over the years. And so we now have a process where we enterprise-wide rack and stack those from each of the installations, and then prioritize those at the enterprise level to start getting those recapitalized across each of the installations. As you know, back at Coronado, several years ago, we lost a 14-inch water main. That was a World War II water main, and that caused some challenges there at Coronado several years ago. And that's another example where we weren't expecting that and had to shift funds that were programmed to go fix something else and get that water line fixed so we could get that base up and operating. I don't, Lou, do you have specifics down at the installation?
Good morning, sir. Thanks for the question. At Oceana, I'm also responsible for Dam Neck Annex, which is about 2.5 miles of beach line. And so we regularly think about the effects of of major storms, including hurricanes. This last year, we spent over $7 million on a shore protection system, fortifying and bringing sand from a couple miles out, and providing that barrier that we need for our installation, as well as doing small things like planting trees. My natural resource director, I think, has planted over 40,000 with other, not herself, with other folks, along the beach line to help prevent that erosion. Inside the further inland with our infrastructure, it is, Oceana came about in 1943. So I imagine a lot of the piping in the sewer is quite old, and that's something we're going to keep a close eye on as we continue.
One of the first things we did when after I was elected to Congress, we voted $60 billion off budget to deal with Hurricane Sandy. No one likes spending that kind of money. You sort of get to the point where when you're reacting, there's nothing you can do. You have to react. But we looked a lot into what to do about that and how to be prepared. And in general, we found that for every dollar you spend on preparedness, you save about $4 on cleanup, whether it's FEMA or the small business, probably the Navy too. So I guess what I'm interested in is, do you feel like we have a plan going forward, sort of in general, to prepare for these kinds of things, to make sure that our bases in particular are prepared for these kinds of things so that they don't cost so much on the back end for cleanup?
We have a plan, and we try to get after that plan. When you go down to the discussion we had up front of what our priorities are, those priorities for resiliency of the base from a utility perspective, while obviously very important and critical, don't rise to the same level, making sure we get ships underway,
right,
aircraft off the deck, submarines away from the pier, and making sure that our strategic assets are properly protected. And so they're important. We work at them. We're not working at them at the rate we would like to, but we have a plan to get after them.
Good. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And also know, we're trying to figure out how to fit some destroyers into San Diego too, and you have a lot of things to balance. So I appreciate that the issue is difficult. If there are things that we can work together on along those lines, I'd be appreciative of knowing, particularly around NDAA time, how we can plan ahead a little bit, make sure that we're ready. And again, thanks for coming, and thank you all for your service. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. We'll now go to Ms. Stefanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I represent the Kenneth A. Kesselring Nuclear Reactor Training Site located in Saratoga County, New York. And as you know, the infrastructure investment in this site is critical to DoD's successful training mission, which directly impacts our national security. The unique training and R&D missions of the Kesselring site demand sustainable infrastructure, facilities, and equipment to train Navy sailors on how to safely operate nuclear reactors that power Navy submarines. And thankfully, Congress recently fully funded this important infrastructure program, which maintains the viability of the site and enables an effective mission and distinctive capability to continue. But what concerns me is the method of moving funds that are already allocated to infrastructure and are being redirected to operations, which could be deemed a higher priority. And as I see it, this can have significant impact on our Navy's readiness. So Vice Admiral Smith, my question is, to what extent do you anticipate the method of redirecting funds from sustainment accounts over to other priorities? How much will this continue to occur? And is there a potential for this redirecting to directly have an impact on the readiness of nuclear training locations such as the Kesselring site?
Thank you, ma'am. As you indicated, Kessler is funded. That's a Department of Energy facility, as you know and are aware, and that has been fully funded. When funds are shifted from the maintenance to the operational, we again go back to that priorities and making sure that it does not impact or affect the nuclear triad and the strategic facilities and requirements we need to meet. So that is our number one priority. Up there, from a quality of life perspective, which we have right now, we make sure that the quality of life mission is being met up there at Saratoga Springs and Kessler. So the funds do get shifted out. That's when we go to our priority list and make sure that we're meeting our top line requirements and then work down our priority list.
Great. So, you mentioned this earlier and you sort of touched on this in your response. You've said you've taken a deliberate level of risk on base operating support functions. So how are unique substantial nuclear training locations like Kesselring prioritized when making such a consideration?
I can't say they're at the top of the list. They're at the high end of the list. Specifically where they fall out, I don't know off the top of my head here, but we pay close attention to them because obviously we got to make sure those crews are properly trained to be able to do their mission at sea. And if we do not provide the resources, the facilities, the instructors, and the curriculum to properly train them, they're not going to be ready to do their job, their mission at sea. And so we focus on that very closely. So when those strategic assets leave port and go to sea to do the mission, they're ready to execute and carry that out on a moment's notice.
Great, thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Stefanik. We'll now go to Mrs. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I certainly want to join my colleague in welcoming all of you here today, but particularly Admiral Smith for the exceptional work that he did in San Diego. And I think, and as I know, as you might know too, when you're in charge of Navy Region Southwest, Southeast, you're really the Navy mayor for the city, and that makes a big difference to San Diegans. And I think what was striking and I think always encouraging was the support for the men and women who serve in our Navy and really being focused on the quality of life. And I know within that context, it must be especially discouraging when you say in the statement that you see some readiness disparities in the living conditions for sailors who are unaccompanied and those who are residing in family housing. And you note that there are 50% readiness disparities for sailors living in the barracks and 77% for those residing in family housing. So how do we square that, I guess? What can we do to balance the costs of modernizing the barracks while maintaining the safety of our most valuable asset? And of course, that is the sailors above the 50% level.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I'm going to ask the skipper to talk a little bit about specifics at Oceana and what he's doing with his barracks there. But if I can, before I yield to him, as we focus on those top-line priorities, we also need to focus on the quality of life, as you mentioned, with barracks and housing. And so we do take care of those, not as fast as we would like. Because of the funding challenges, and so that timeline to get them to the quality that we want is taking longer than we desire, but we are systematically moving through those. Lou has got some barracks that he's got programmed to work right now, and so I'd ask Lou to talk specifics at his installation, number of facilities you've got, and which ones that you're getting fixed, and what that means from a timeline perspective.
Yes, sir. Thanks, ma'am, for the question. At Oceana, we have 13 barracks. Currently, 10 of them are rated substandard. I will say that we have a new barracks that's being built, a $30 million MILCOM project that we're very grateful for. That should be online in March. Of those 10, we have 5 that are currently being programmed and funded to get rectified and bring back up. And the moniker I use around Oceana, as far as when I look at public works and installations, we look at roofs, boilers, chillers, and fire protection. And that's kind of the mantra, and that's what we look at. And so when we look at the barracks, those are the things that we're looking to make sure are working, because we want our sailors and Marines to have hot water in the morning. When it's hot out, we want them to come back after an 18-hour day on the flight line to be able to go back into a cool room. So although we still have a ways to go, I think that goes to the thought that we need to have a systematic, programmatic way of making sure these funding streams continue, so that all of these barracks for the sailors and Marines are brought back up to standard.
Regionally, we look, as the installation CEO articulated, we make sure we understand the condition of all of our unaccompanied housing and have projects on the books to be able to work through modernization of those. I'd like to give you an example of a case where we worked through a situation where some of our rooms in unaccompanied housing, in this case it was at New Orleans, where because of some mold and some ventilation problems, we had to take the rooms offline. And we just cannot have people in those rooms, so we took them offline. And we didn't have the inventory of additional rooms, and it had a direct impact to the operational forces that are working out in New Orleans. So we had to recode Navy Gateway Inns and Suites rooms, essentially hotel rooms, to be able to move those service members into those rooms, the Navy Gateway Inns and Suites rooms, until we were able to put a repair for the ventilation and address the environmental issues in our UH. So we didn't fix the problem again holistically, but we put a Band-Aid repair, and we did that by working very closely with our customer, talking to them about their throughput of personnel, and then also making sure that we were taking care of them. So sometimes it's about moving people and rooms around on the chessboard. The same thing occurs with hangars when hangars go down. Thank you, ma'am.
So I would just add, so that's a great example of how we continue to meet mission when these kind of challenges pop. So we didn't put any single sailors out on the street. Admiral Jackson and her team down at the base in New Orleans took care of them. What we ended up doing is folks that would have used the on-base hotel, if you will, now had to go to a hotel out in town. So not optimal, but it took care of our sailors, ensured they were being taken care of until we got the problem resolved, and then we're able to bring them back into the barracks. And we do that in all our mission areas all the time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Davis. We'll now go to Mr. Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your service and testimony here today. In the 2016 NDAA, we were careful on the overseas contingency dollars, to try to make them more fungible so that if they could be directly related to contingency support, you might have some flexibility at your installations for that support. And you spoke here about hangars, comms, airfields. I mean, those are mission essential elements that we see there. Can you speak to the impact that that may have, or will you be able to make good on some of that?
I'm going to have to go look and see exactly where we're spending our OCO dollars. I don't know where we're dividing those, and specifically where we're using that budget line, at what resources, what facilities to take care of. So I owe you that.
Sir, in FY11 and 12, in my region, the Southeast region, we were dependent on OCO. It was in the millions. Last year, we were at $500,000 OCO funds, and it went into my port ops program, primarily for contracts to take care of some of the boss support at my ports. So we'll give you an example. I think we have worked hard to not be dependent on OCO, and that is where we've been moving.
Yeah, we would all like to not be dependent on OCO, but I think, in a bipartisan fashion, what we saw was there was a need, and we tried to provide a little flexibility. It is baling wire and duct tape, but maybe it can go. You spoke on quality of life, and having spent a career in the military, I understand how important that is, especially during deployments. Can you address that specifically on what your concerns are on the shortfalls? Because it's not often addressed. It's usually last on the list, and I would be interested in your thoughts there.
So when sequestration occurred, we had to reduce a lot of our quality of life facilities. So we reduced hours in the gyms, we reduced hours in our single sailor facilities. We've been able to now buy some of that back. But when the budget starts getting pressurized more, that's where we go. So we still provide gym hours, we still provide the resource, we just don't provide the volume of it. Just this year, we have gone back and increased our gym hours an additional 4 hours every day. That's been very well received. We're increasing right now some of our CDC hours. Our single sailor hours have come back. And so we watch that closely. I really watch that in our facilities that what I refer to as over the horizon, so not in metro areas where there's not much to do outside the gate. We also, from a prioritization standpoint, focus overseas, focus remote areas, and then focus in the metro areas. Lou, you can probably give a couple examples at the installation level of how you focus on quality of life and how you prioritize what you do and don't do.
Yes, thanks for the question, sir. I know that for Fleet and Family Support Center services, those are crucial for quality of life for our sailors and their families. That peace of mind when a sailor or Marine is deployed, their family can go to a resource which they know they can get support. I know recently the Navy has initiated 2 programs that I think are wonderful, the Navy Wounded Warrior Safe Harbor Program, the Navy Gold Star Program, 2 programs that are very, very important, as you know. But I think it is a zero-sum game, and a program that we're in the process of phasing out is the Relocation Assistance Program. So in a perfect world, we'll be able to keep all these programs for these families, but we know that that's not the reality. And how do we mitigate that? Well, we ask other entities on our installation to see if they can assist in managing that relocation assistance program.
And you bring up a good point on the mitigation. In fact, there's a lot of political hay made about, why do we have commissaries? Why do we have base exchanges? Why do we have those sorts of things? But I don't think there's a clear understanding the impact of those dollars that come into the MWR programs. And if you have sailors in a gym, they're fit sailors. That affects readiness. And so could you speak to that a little bit?
I know for a fact that our sailors love and their families love the activities that we have on the installation. My MWR team is very robust, and whether it's family fests we have quarterly or events around the holidays, especially for those families whose husbands or wives are deployed or children are deployed, it goes a long way and provides that great peace of mind. So I do think they're invaluable, and they're a great part in making sure that readiness is there. Speaking from firsthand experience, I know that when I'm flying combat missions over Afghanistan, what allows me to do that comfortably is know that my family's well cared for back home, both within the fence line of Oceana as well as outside the fence line in the community of Virginia Beach, which is wonderful. We have a wonderful relationship with the community there.
So we have an expectation that our commanding officers are getting a pulse on what their tenant commands need. And sometimes it is hard to quantify whether they are happy and getting the resources that they need. So that happens through the communications, the constant drumbeat with the tenants, making sure that through tenant command meetings, through the senior enlisted command master chiefs, whether or not they're getting what they need. And then we tailor it. So Admiral Smith talked about what we might do at over-the-horizon location because of where they are. Maybe they're remote. Maybe they have better resources in town. And so then we can also tailor that and modify. We have the ability to modify maybe the hours or the services that they're getting, or provide more of one thing, like more outdoor recreational facilities because of where they are versus another. And then another layer to that is what we do outside with the community and those relationships with the community. And building support so that it's not just very insular at the installation, but it's layered, and we get amazing support from all of our communities. But it's about our team getting out there and educating and making those relationships.
If I may. So I've had the privilege of visiting 69 of our 70 installations. And if you wanted to kind of bin what I focus on when I go out and spend a day at an installation is I go and say, I want to see your worst stuff, all right? I want to see what you're most proud of, and I want to see your quality of life stuff. And so I get into the gyms, I go to Fleet and Family Service Center, I go to Navy Marine Corps Relief. I want to see that stuff. I want to understand it because we are pressurized and we have challenges. And I want to know that installation X has got a challenge and installation Y has got a challenge, and I want to know which challenge is worse because that's the one I'm going to go out and focus on and get fixed. And then, we also look in remote areas. So as we go back to Saratoga Springs, we don't have a gym on that facility. So we have a partnership with the YMCA there locally, and we buy membership for our sailors and their families. And so, because I want to make sure that they can be out in the community, I want to make sure that they can have a place for their kids to do stuff, they can go to the gym. I can't do that on the base, so we do that at the YMCA. So we focus on that very carefully wherever we are to make sure our families are being taken care of. We're an all-volunteer Navy, we're all volunteer force. We've got to provide for our sailors and their families.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses. Admiral Smith, I'm trying to, again, sort of get the timeline of the 2013 budget resolution, the one we just passed in the fall, the omnibus, and just sort of how that sort of is, flowing into your decision-making process. Again, you just described for a moment ago how you were able to restore some gym hours, which I guess was probably sometime in 2015. So obviously, you were still living with the, the 2-year 2013 budget resolution and the prior omnibus. So now we've got a new omnibus that's 3 weeks old, and just again, if you can just sort of tease that out a little bit in terms of what you're anticipating, or have you digested it yet, even, or is it
So there are some things we've been able to buy back. So I had mentioned we take risk in grounds maintenance. We have bought back some grounds maintenance. Grounds maintenance isn't just necessarily about how pretty the base looks, which I think is important because if it looks good, you work good, but it's also important around our airfields. He's very concerned about his ground maintenance around the airfields because if we're not maintaining that grounds, it brings in rodents, it brings in birds, it brings in airstrikes, and that becomes a safety and a mission impact. So we've been able to buy that back a little bit. We've been able to buy back some of the hours in the gym. We've been able to buy back some of the hours in our child development centers. So it's not huge gains, it's incremental gains.
Can you give like a percentage? I mean, is it like half?
Expand that a little more.
In terms of you're saying gains, I mean, obviously you're sort of using like a.
Right, so let's just use the gym for example.
Right.
My hours may be off just a little bit. We were at 100, I think we were at 96 hours a week. We've gone up to 112. That's an example. Child care was 12. We're trying to go to 16. In some places, we're going to 14. So it's a couple hours here, a couple hours there. But in the case of child care, if you've got someone that's got to be at work at 5 o'clock in the morning, and the CDC's not open at 5 o'clock in the morning,
That's a problem.
they weren't open at 5 o'clock in the morning before. They were open at 6.
Right.
We're now starting to slowly roll out and getting them opened at 5. And I can't just turn a switch and do that because I've got to do the hiring process, I've got to do the training, I've got to do the security vetting, but we're slowly working that. But again, it's small stuff, but it does make a difference to the quality of life of our families.
No, and I think probably having these nail-biting moments when we finally get stuff done doesn't make it any easier for you in terms of planning. But as I said, we finally now have an omnibus in place, so the horizon is clear at least to October 1, and then we have a budget resolution that actually goes into 2017. So, again, in terms of just your job, I mean, is that like, are you in a better place than you were in 2014 when
I
you
am in
started?
a better place. Yes, sir, I am.
Okay. Admiral, you look like you want to jump
So
in.
I'd just like to add, so we get the operating report from CNICA down to the region, and it gives us predictability. It gives us the ability to articulate to our tenants what operating levels they can expect. It kind of takes out that angst of not really knowing what type and what level of services, the common operating level of services they might get. So we're able to articulate that, and then there's a better understanding, and that's good. It also gives us the ability to stay online with preventive maintenance. We're still, though, in reactive mode often, but that predictability planning, and then planning our projects, having them on the shelf and ready so that we can execute early, as opposed to waiting, and then getting inside the turning radius and not being able to execute, is also very valuable.
Good. Well, again, the 2-year budget resolution, I think, was a healthy move forward, and hopefully we can continue that. Stop torturing you guys. And Admiral, again, you're welcome to come up to Groton, to your old stomping grounds anytime.
So I was up there last winter, and I will be up there the Thursday before Easter, visiting the base.
Thank you, Mr. Courtney. We'll now go to Mrs. Hartzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of you for your service. Appreciate what you do. Was wondering, given the trend of funding that Milcon accounts below the model's requirement over the past few years, what level of investment and over what period of time do you think will be necessary to fully restore the readiness of our installations and our facilities?
The current funding level is not going to be able to fully restore our installations. We are getting, there's very little military construction dollars coming. The amount that we get budgeted for does not meet the requirement that we have. So While the budget we have now is helping us make progress and moving forward, it does not meet the need that we have over the long term.
You indicated that earlier and that you're decreasing, you have below 90%, and you talked about an index of 80 and something about it's decreasing at 2.5% or something. I don't remember those numbers. But can you give us the dollar amount? How much money would you want Congress to invest in this infrastructure in order to help make up the shortfall and to help you catch back up to where you need to be?
Yes, ma'am. Can I get back to you on that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, sure. Admiral?
Ma'am, maybe I can give you some numbers that we've looked at in our region. So in Region Southeast, we have 16,000 facilities. Of those facilities, the plant replacement value for those facilities is $23.3 billion. I have condition indices for all of those facilities, and the percentage by value of those facilities that are in the poor or failing category is 42%. So 42% of 23.3 billion, and then what you need to get them better, will give you a rough idea, but that's a number that I have used. Thank you, ma'am.
I look forward to getting those figures because that's certainly very important that we have at least an idea of the goal of what is needed to fully have our infrastructure where it needs to be. So that's very helpful. And just as we go out and talk to the public and others about this, reduced readiness and the concerns that we've had with the budget cuts, it really helps to have those specific examples that we can use. And I appreciate your example, Captain, about the hangar issue. That makes sense as people come back from deployment to be able to get in there. But can you give me some more specific examples of a decrease in readiness of our Navy because they haven't had the money that you have needed for the infrastructure investments that we have? So if you could give me 3 or 4 examples like the hangar one, that would be helpful.
Mr. Courtney just left, but I can give one up at New London. So Pier 15 up there, which is the pier that we have the floating dry dock at. We did our periodic inspection and found it was more deteriorated than we thought. So we had to take that pier offline. We have mitigations in place in case we have to do an emergency dry docking. We'll now go to electric boat. We'll lease their floating dry dock because we've got to put a submarine dry dock up there in emergency. We want to get that thing back online as soon as possible. We've got it, for the next scheduled dry docking. So we're fixing that. But we've taken those resources from other things that we would have gone and fixed, of lesser importance, to get that pier back. So we're still meeting mission, but we're deferring maintenance on something else because that was an unexpected challenge that popped up. We realized that's a top priority challenge because I've got to get that floating dry dock. I got to get the pier fixed so I can use that floating dry dock, and so that's what we're going after. That's an example. I know, Mary, you've got a couple.
Ma'am, in Kings Bay, Trident Refit facility has a dry dock, and we have chillers in that dry dock that are critical to the ability of the dry dock to operate. And the chillers have reached the end of their life cycle, need to be upgraded, and we didn't have the money to be able to update the chillers and do all the controllers with it. So we replaced a chiller, but we're not able to replace the supporting controllers. So we're in a condition right now where we often have to operate those chillers manually as opposed to the way they were originally and ideally designed. So that is one example. Another example that will drill down to some specific numbers is I have every naval aviator that's going through training goes through my region to one of my installations. So a lot of naval aviation training. One of my biggest customers is the Chief of Naval Air Training. So my airfields such as Whiting, Jacksonville, Meridian, we are looking at everything from pavement indices, whether the pavement on the runways is appropriate, hangar facilities, just envelopes of buildings. So an example in Pensacola is that we have a hangar suppression system that is not operating. Again, it's towards the end of its life cycle. It has had Band-Aid repairs to it In the past 4 years, we've had it dumped, suppress 8 times, which is not ideal to happen on aircraft, causes problems to the warfighter directly. So that means we have to not use those portions of the hangar, and that correlates to 17% less available space for those training wings that are trying to operate out of those hangars. So that is an example that has some specific numbers. Thank you, ma'am.
So I can give you another airfield an example. So at Naval Station Norfolk, where the AMC terminal is, the apron there. That's a part of the apron that needs to be repaired. It's got challenges, but we can make it work because the sailors and the airmen go out every morning and do a walk down of the apron for 35, 40 minutes, 25 sailors, airmen to go out and do that. So they go out and police it and make sure there's no foreign object debris on the apron, and then we can use the apron. But that's 45 minutes of an individual that's going out and doing that instead of something else, instead of training or making whatever the repairs, maintenance. And so we make it work, but that's a project that we'd like to get, will eventually get funded, but right now it doesn't meet the priority, so it's impacting the sailors and the airmen. And Lou, I know you have an example.
Thanks for the question, ma'am. At Dam Neck Annex, we have a facility, the Navy Marine Corps Intelligence Training Center. It's where information dominance sailors, warfare specialists are training. And in the last year, fiscal year 15, we had 57 calls that the fire department had to respond to. And these weren't fires, these were various things like water leaks, they were orders, they were sensor faults. Each time that call goes out, you have to have all these students leaving the building. It's disrupting their training. We mitigated that, of course. The instructors and the sailors and the students eventually got their training done, and they're executing very well out in the fleet right now. But in the short term, we're putting a Band-Aid on it. We have a couple $100,000 going this year to help those fire protection systems as well as others. But it's a $12 million unfunded project to really, truly fix the problem and not treat the symptom, and that's another example.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Hartzler. We'll now go to Mr. Gibson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate our witnesses here today. Thank you for your leadership and your families for their sacrifice. Much of what I was interested in has been addressed, specifically with regard to base operations and quality of life and the impact on retention of high-quality sailors and Marines. But perhaps we can put a finer point on it. Let me frame it. Be very interested in your feedback. Is there any specific data and analysis of this stress that you've done well communicating in terms of impacts on retention, and maybe a little bit more on systemic programs you have in terms of getting feedback? Some of that has been addressed, but if there's anything more you want to mention in terms of how you get the feedback from your sailors and Marines. And then with regard to specific programs, we've heard today about housing, child development, MWR, single sailor, and that was helpful to get that report. And particularly thank you for being creative in your support of families. You talked about the YMCA membership. That's very helpful. I'm thinking in terms of, one of the things I remember from the Army is, which in some ways we were gaining in some of the experiences that you guys deal with forever, and that is the repetitive deployments. And one of the ways the Army addressed that is we had this program, Building Strong and Ready Families, where after a deployment, a family would actually be funded to do an offsite. And the family would go together, be a nice place, either by the water or maybe up in the mountains. And there would be then experts who would come in and help with the reintegration process. Chaplains would head this program, and they had counselors that came in and just a lot of insight. It was very helpful. And then similarly, we brought forward a program that had like life counselors that were brought onto base to help, particularly the younger folks, just dealing with the stress of everything that's going on. So I'm interested in, perhaps some thoughts on that. And then also finally schools, any impact in terms of any of that. So really sort of an open-ended question to pursue a lot of, I think, the great testimony you've already brought forward on quality of life, but maybe with a little finer point on how that's impacting retention.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So I'm gonna defer to Lou in a couple of minutes to talk specifically how he works at the installation, and he has a process in place to do that, to get the feedback that you ask for. But much like you described for the Army, it's Force Master Chief right back here on the deck plates, out and about, talking to sailors, talking to families. It's me out and about talking. It's all of us out and about talking to our sailors and getting that feedback. How are things going? What are the challenges? What do you need? We have our Fleet and Family Service Centers. We do return and reunion seminars on with our squadrons and our ships if they come back for reintegration. Much like you have off-sites, we have a Credo program where our families can sign up and go spend a weekend on whatever specific topics are that Credo is focused towards. In our schools, we have our school liaison officer program that helps transitioning families from one location to another, getting them integrated into the school. The program is working superbly from my perspective right now, very good. So what I'm giving you are informal processes to get that feedback, to understand what the pressures are on our families, what the challenges, concerns are, so then we can go off and attack them, start up new programs, or our programs working correctly in our Fleet and Family Service Center. What I do is I'd ask Lou now to talk some specifics how he gets feedback from his tenants on the issues and challenges that he's seeing at Oceana.
Thank you, Admiral. Thank you, sir, for the question. Thanks for your service as well. There's on a higher level, on the installation level, there's a senior level survey that goes out yearly, and we receive that feedback directly from the tenant leadership. But as Admiral mentioned, my best feedback comes back from walking around and talking to sailors and talking to families, which I like to do all the time. I'd rather be doing that than emails, like most. We also have other avenues, MWR, and through the CDC and child development centers and child youth programs. There's boards there that the parents chair and provide some feedback, and I see those as well. There's a lot of different avenues, but a specific quantifiable data point I don't specifically have for you, sir, but I know that you asked about schools. Also continue Admiral's thought with our school liaison officer. At Oceana, being in Virginia Beach, and I also have a Fentress, our outlying airfields in Chesapeake. The schools are amazing. But through that, we have, a lot of times sailors and their moms and dads have to work at 5 a.m., 6 a.m. So there's a program where they drop their children off on the installation at one of our buildings, and then we have buses. MWR will bus the students out to the city schools, and then vice versa. I mean, that relationship is you can't put a number on that, and it really is great peace of mind for these families to know that their kids are cared for before and after school, and of course while they're going to some wonderful institutions of learning in the cities.
So I'd like to brag about two programs in Southeast that, again, have talked to the tailorability of being able to respond to a request. So we've started a pilot program where out of Fleet and Family, we've developed a curriculum so that people who want to learn about how to take care of ailing parents. So that's an example of something that wasn't part of our normal curriculum and the courses and the counseling that we provided, but we realized there was a real demand. So we put that together, rolled it out, piloted it. That's one example. Another example is we continue to work towards resiliency of our force and sexual assault and prevention. We started some self-defense courses that had not previously been something that we had in our toolkit, and now we've added that. So those are some examples of the closer we are to understanding the needs, then we have the ability to work within some of the controls that we already have to be able to provide these resources, which are so valuable to our force.
I thank all the witnesses for that testimony. And just one quick follow-up, Chairman, if I may. And I know this goes across jurisdictional or functional lines, but so you haven't, just to confirm, there's been no red flags as far as retention is concerned for the Navy based on the stress on base operating support and quality of life. You're not getting any feedback from Navy that's something that
I am not personally aware.
Okay, that's good. Great report. Thank you. I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. I want to draw the association between what you've laid out with installation, support, infrastructure, and readiness. And you all have laid out a number of those different elements. But Captain Schager, I want to go to you to kind of get your perspective as a base commander. As you look at the things you have to deal with, you have decisions and directives coming down from corporate Navy saying, here's the installation support you need to provide, here's the infrastructure we want you to provide. So you get that direction. Obviously, you have to respond because there's the unexpected elements of what goes on. Your job is to provide that mission support for training and operations there on the base. So you have to reconcile those two things. Your job is to do those things while making sure that you're generating readiness. So my question is this. As you are juggling all those different pieces, give us a specific example. And you've given some, like a hangar that didn't have some fire suppression in certain areas. But take the next step further. What does that mean as far as operational readiness? So while you may not be able to keep aircraft there, what does that mean as far as training missions? What happens in reduction in training missions? What happens in deployment schedules? What happens with all the things that potentially stack up? So if you can take that the next step, and that is in generating readiness and making sure that as your air wings are coming in there doing pre-deployment training or getting ready to do workups to go for the carrier to leave, give me an example about how that infrastructure, how that installation support, how that facilities capability totally affects what you're having to generate every day.
Thanks for the question, sir. You know, what helps is I was a recipient of this customer service for the last 24 years, and having operated at Oceana for a majority of my career, both as a young pilot and continue on to a squadron commander level, I recognize the importance of making sure that the runway's ready to go when we have sorties available. I will say, and I want to thank you again, we have a special project currently underway, a $100 million project to replace the aging lighting system on our airfield. It's 1950 technology. When I first came into this position as the executive officer of the installation, I think the first night we had one of the electrical vaults, went out, which meant half of the airfield went out as far as lighting. And for a base that needs 24/7, 365 kind of support, that was very disconcerting. So this $100 million is greatly needed, and that's kind of an example of the process working. Those requirements were articulated well before I got there, and we finally had the funding. But back to continue on to that discussion or thought, at Oceana, we also have VFA 106, which is the Fleet Replacement Squadron. That is the home of the East Coast training for new pilots and WSOs, weapon systems officers, to become fleet aviators. They're held to their structure, and their throughput is crucial to feed the fleet squadron so that they're fully manned when they deploy. And so we really can't afford a whole lot of delays, whether it's a lack of air traffic controllers or airfield lighting problems or hangar challenges where they can't get the maintenance done because the hangar's not equipped. So I work closely with the Commodore in the operational side, and we speak every day, and we talk about our needs and challenges, and he works up through his chain of command as I do with mine. And I think that works well, and that we're constantly checking and making sure that the readiness is available. And I will say that, at least since I've been there in this position, since 2000, in the USS George Bush in 2014, with 3 F-18 squadrons from Oceana, the Theodore Roosevelt, and now the Truman, those squadrons deployed ready. But it will, as we described, the airfield renovations are greatly needed. If those were delayed any further, I think that would be a great impact. And the hangar situation, as I described, I think to have that predictable, programmatic funding for the hangars and get those repaired, I think will go a long way.
Sir, I think we're very good at finding alternatives when we need to, when we're in extremis, and we know that the warfighter can no longer do what they need to do. They can't produce the pilots that they need to, or they can't train. We're also work very hard to make sure that the process by which we look at all these projects are racked and stacked, and that we are able to articulate from an installations perspective the direct correlation to the readiness as you've asked. So an example is at May, we have a wastewater treatment plant that is currently not meeting environmental criteria, and we are operating under a consent order. The relationship that we have with the Florida Department of the FDQ, our relationship with them is important, but it is also equally important that as I prepare these projects and push them up my chain of command, that I am able to articulate what will happen if we no longer are able to use that wastewater treatment plant, and what that will mean to the ships that are berthed in Mayport, that they may have to go to a different port, or that we may have to pay to move the waste, which now has high levels of metals in it because we have increased the ship loading in Mayport, and be able to articulate that so that it is a unified front from the warfighter to the installation all the way up to articulate that readiness. And it's easier to articulate in specific projects than it is across the entire enterprise.
Gotcha. Let me expand upon that a little bit. As you look at your mission overall and then your job in supporting that mission, we know that you're looking at infrastructures, you're looking at installation support, trying to manage risk within that area, while at the same time our effort now is to reestablish full spectrum readiness. It's an arduous path to get there, and what you're having to do is to manage that through that resource gauntlet that we've gone through here recently. Let me get your perspective. As you are making those decisions and looking at how you balance those things, trying to get to full spectrum readiness as quickly as we can. As Mr. Courtney pointed out, we're now with some certainty in a 2-year budget. Give us your perspective on how far you believe you can get within your mission set to get to full spectrum readiness. And then secondly is, where do you see yourself in a 10-year window down the road in a scenario of either level funding from this point on or back to sequestration levels, because that also introduces a fair amount of risk. And the reason I ask for static funding levels is we're trying to regain readiness. So we've lost some in the last 3 years. And to regain that obviously is a challenge, but also the slope of the curve we have to ascend to get there is also steeper. So give me your perspective within those scenarios about how you get back to full spectrum readiness.
I suppose I'm not as optimistic as perhaps others that we will get to full spectrum readiness. So sequestration takes us a step back. Where we are today is holding a little bit of improvement, as Admiral Smith articulated. To get to 100% funding still doesn't get us to full spectrum readiness because we have degraded so significantly over time. So it is hard for me to imagine how we get so far, as far as we need to get to full spectrum.
At our current funding, and if you continue that out, we will continue to lose ground. And if we were to get to the OSD funding level of 90%, that's only 90% of an already deteriorated infrastructure. So to get back to 100%, you've got to shoot ahead of the duck, and we're not shooting ahead of the duck.
Let me get this perspective from you too. Not only are you having to look at recapitalization on existing assets, you're also faced with new mission sets. You have Littoral Combat Ship, you have the P-8, you have an upcoming Ohio-class replacement. All of those things too, those new mission requirements also create new demands on infrastructure. So how does that exacerbate your challenge in just trying to maintain status quo when those new mission sets are set upon that and the challenges that you have to face there with infrastructure and installation support?
So a couple of things I'd like to talk to. First is the process and how we accommodate those new mission sets and how we understand what the requirements are. So we have a strategic laydown dispersal process where when those new mission sets come out and we as a Navy and as our operators, our forces decide where we want those assets need to be to meet our country's mission, we then go and look at those installations, whether it be the skipper or one of the other 69 COs, and saying, you're getting this asset, whether it's people, a submarine, or a squadron, whatever it is, can you accept them with what you've got? Do you have the pier? Do you have the runway? Do you have the hangar capacity? Do you have the housing? Do you have the child development centers? What does it do to your wait lists in those different things? And then they come back and feed that into the regional commander, and then she racks and stacks that, and it comes up to us. So we now know what the requirement is and what our gaps are and what we need to do. And those gaps then generate requirements that Lou will then at Oceana create and then pass through the regional commander. And then that then gets pushed up, so we now know what we have. Then we go down with those priorities, those are going to take the priority to make sure we can meet those new mission sets. When those come in, that gets to your question, that pressurizes the discretionary funds we have to do existing things. And those are directed, so they're going to get funded.
Right.
And that's a good thing because we need that capability.
Sure.
But it does, as you say and indicate, pressurize us further on existing assets that we have that are declining.
So in your rack and stack scenario then, if you're placing that new mission set requirement there and you have to provide infrastructure installation support for that, does it then push out other things that are on your recapitalization list that say, well, we won't be able to do that because we have these additional requirements that we have to find resources for?
Yes, sir, it does, and that's what puts us into the reactive mode that we've talked about, and how Mary down in New Orleans reacted to fix the mold challenge she had in the UH.
One last question is how are these new mission sets affecting the size of the things or the number of items that get pushed out because of that? And if you don't have it now, just you can take it for the record and get it back to us. But I think that's critically important for us to understand, because that gives us some measure of the magnitude of the issue that we're dealing with.
Yes, sir, I'll take that. I'm trying to quantify it in my mind, and I can't do it justice here.
If you can do that, because that's going to be extraordinarily important for us as we're going into this year's NDAA to make sure we quantify that, because people have to understand the magnitude. And the reason behind these hearings is to make sure we draw a direct association between infrastructure, installations, and facility support with operational readiness in restoring full spectrum readiness. So we need to get a gauge on where the gaps are and then the path to get back to full spectrum readiness. So if you could provide that to us, that would be great. Now I'm going to go to Ms. Bordalia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Vice Admiral Smith, or the other witnesses here, could you please describe at what level the connections are being made between the training requirements of a unit and the ability of an installation to support those training requirements? And how often are they re-evaluated? And as a follow-up, have you found the Facility Condition Index to be an effective system for tracking maintenance needs?
Yes, ma'am. I'll start off and then ask the two of them to add on. Bottom line, those decisions are being discussed at all levels. The skipper talks to it with his tenants and the requirements and needs. Admiral Jackson does at her level, and I do it at my level. So we had talked about the strategic laydown dispersal process, generator requirements, the facility condition index code that you talk about. That's very accurate. We track that closely, so we know what the condition is of every single one of our facilities. That then feeds into the priority list that we've talked about. So when it comes time to figure out what we're going to fund, we use an integration process at the region level. So Mary will take all of her installations requirements, and all of those projects have been prioritized, and we have a ranking formula we use based upon safety, based upon operational necessity, based upon condition, and that prioritizes it. So she'll, in her region, prioritize that out, push it up to me at the enterprise level, and then I'll take in all 11 regions' requirements, and then I sit down, and she's already done this at her level with the fleet at the region, and then I do it with the fleets. I sit down with PAC Fleet, I sit down with Fleet Forces Command, sit down with OpNav, sit down with the SysComs, and we look at how that prioritization came out to determine what we're going to fund. So to double back to your original question, we address that at all three levels, and we use the facility index code or condition index very closely to do that. So Mary, I would turn over to you for your area, then ask Lou at his installation level.
Ma'am, I've been doing installation business for about 5 years, starting in Naval Station Norfolk. And I would say over those 5 years, we have gotten much more rigorous in understanding how we have to articulate our requirements tied to readiness as we go forward. And we do that, Admiral Smith said, at all levels. Our installation COs, as the landlord, have to be talking to their tenants to be able to quantify that. And I say that somewhat in jest, but it does become a bit of a competitive environment. Every CO is fighting for their projects, and they have to have it as clear and as concise and as tight as they can as they move it up to me at my level at the region. And the process that Admiral Smith articulated through a regional mission integration group up to the SMIG is very valuable. And we have warfighter representation at the region level. We have it at the CNIC level as well. So it's not like we're doing it without them. Another process that Admiral Smith has continued in his tenure as Naval Installations Command is something called the Warfare Enterprise Flag Officer Assignments, in which he has regional commanders, usually tied to their warfare specialty, assigned to be the linkage with that warfare enterprise. So for myself, I'm a surface warfare officer, so I support the surface warfare enterprise, and I have a regular drumbeat to talk globally, not just my region, about those projects and those things that are going on in CNIC that should be of interest to the surface warfare enterprise, and vice versa. They talk to me about what they're concerned about. So again, we get that unified front. And that Warfare Enterprise Flag Officer assignment exists for surface warfare, for strategic programs, of which I also have, naval aviation, information dominance, and undersea enterprise. So that is another means, it's another layer by which we are able to make sure we understand the requirement. Thank you, ma'am.
Captain?
Yes, ma'am, thanks for the question. And as I mentioned before, I was the recipient of customer service for many years. Now I'm the provider of that. And around my installation, when I talk about it, I talk about providing great customer relationships, not just service, and that communicating with all my warfare commanders and leadership, whether it's the Commodore of the Air Wing, if they had a bad day, even irrespective of facilities, it was a bad weather day and we have to fly on the weekend, I'm aware of that day. I mentioned the example about the intelligence school, which was having a lot of fire alarms go off and how that affected their training. Their leadership is calling me up, and I put that into my calculus. When the regional mission integration group meets, I bring those topics up, and I can speak eloquently, well, I like to think I can, because I've spoken to those folks, and their leadership is also in that decision process. So naval aviation is also in the room at the RMIG, as is the information dominance. And so through that, I think I'm comfortable that the requirements that our tenants are looking to achieve are articulated on our side so we can provide the facilities necessary, prioritizing as such.
So I'm gathering then that the systems are working.
Yes, ma'am.
I have another question real quickly. This is to Rear Admiral Jackson, or perhaps the captain. Earlier, you gave an example of hangar maintenance and how the lack of predictable FSRM funding can impact facility maintenance plans. Now, can you provide similar examples on the base operating support program, specifically how repeated reliance on continuing resolutions, late appropriations, and the lack of predictable funding has impacted base operating support?
I can start, ma'am. Thank you. Commonly when someone like from this, from my family, for example, we talk about readiness and going out to war and doing combat missions, they think about the aircraft I'm going to fly in, is that ready? But there's a lot more to it. And so when you mention base operating support, it's do the sailors have a room to go back to that's comfortable and heated and hot water? Do they have a galley that's ready? Do they have the Fleet and Family Support Center that's providing the services? So it's not just a runway. So the full spectrum of support affects readiness. And as we had spoken, and both admirals have articulated, we are taking risks. The mission is still being met, but I do think that if it's not properly funded in years out, I think things will, the risks are going to get greater.
And in a timely manner.
Yes.
Rear Admiral?
Ma'am, when we started decreasing our BOSS because of the continuing resolution and sequester, the areas that we saw it the most were in FX, so ground support, so ground maintenance, TR, transportation vehicles, and then also utilities. And so our customers feel the effects of that, and it's more than just cosmetic. To give you an example, in ground maintenance. So the higher grass may mean increased pest control. It may increase greater risk in the BASH program for our aviators as they're flying. For TR, it may mean they have less ability to get vehicles to move things around that they need to do. And so that is where we have felt it in terms of BOSS. And of course, as we have been able now to increase those common operating levels in that and articulate that back to our customers, that is good.
Vice Admiral.
Yes, ma'am. So a CR, it just makes the process harder. It creates uncertainty for our workforce. We can't execute projects. We can't do design until the CR. We're through the CR. So now you're doing things. You're awarding contracts on top of each other, and we can't spread the workload out over the year. And so we're either doing it in 9 months or we're doing it in 6 months. Where the requirement is, and of course, that increased workload or increased stress, and so it comes down to it just makes the job harder. We still get it done, but it just makes it
More
harder.
difficult.
And every time you have to change a contract, that takes time. It's not free. So as you decrease operating levels, it's not like you can just stop cutting the grass. You have to go in and do contract mods, and that's people and that's time. And so that has a drain as well. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Bardalia. I want to thank our witnesses today, Admiral Smith, Admiral Jackson, Captain Schager. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for your responses today. We'd ask that you provide the written responses that we'd asked for. We will be using them as we put together this year's National Defense Authorization Act, which, by the way, is going to take place earlier this year by a 3-week window. So we're going to push things to the left to hopefully get our jobs done more quickly so we can get the appropriations part of this done more quickly, too. So again, thanks so much for your service. Thanks for your perspective today. This is very, very helpful to us, and we will continue the conversation with you. Thanks again. And our subcommittee hearing is adjourned.